Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening, whether you're here in person or online. First of all, for people online, you can activate translation in case you would like the subtitle in French. So, once again, thank you everyone for being here. I'm Frédéric Janin, a research fellow for the IRIS Climate, Energy and Security Program, as well as the Observatory for the Security and Energy Flow and Material. I'm very pleased to host tonight this seminar organized with our partner, the International Tax and Investment Center from Washington, on the occasion of the publication of a joint report on Central Asia in the global nuclear energy renaissance, which is already available online if you're interested. This evening, together with our experts, we will explore the unique and growing role of Central Asian country in the global nuclear industry. Today, Kazakhstan is already a major supplier of uranium, followed by Uzbekistan. In the coming decades, maybe Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan may also emerge as a key player. But the current energy renaissance embodied in the December 2023 declaration in Abu Dhabi, calling for a tripling of global nuclear capacity before 2050, reshapes the strategic role of Central Asia, and not only for uranium supply. With me tonight to enlighten us about this very strategic topic, first of all, Sébastien Pérouse, which is not on the table with us. He will come just after. Sébastien, you're Director of the Central Asia Program and Research Professor in the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at the George Washington University. You're also an Associate Researcher at Europe Central Asia Monitoring and member of Crude Accountability, an organization for the protection of the human and environmental rights in the Caspian and Black Sea region. Also with us online, Zumabek Sarabekov. You are a director of the Institute of World Economic and Politics of the Nursultan Nazarbayev Foundation, a think tank established in 2003 and based in Kazakhstan, discussing global economy, geopolitics, security. Good evening, Mr. Sarabekov.
Good evening.
Also online with us, Wesley Alexander Hill. Wesley, you are an expert on grand strategy, geoeconomics, and international relations with a regional specialization in China, Eurasia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, with an emphasis on Chinese influence in Central Asia. You are the Associate Director and Lead Analyst for the Energy Growth and Security Program at the International Tax and Investment Center, a program on critical natural resources, energy transformation, and geopolitics in Eurasia. Good evening.
Thank you very much.
With us here on this table, Ariel Cohen. Ariel, you are a senior fellow at Atlantic Council and recognized expert on energy policy with an expertise on Russia, Eurasia, Eastern, Central Europe, and the Middle East. You are managing director of the Energy Growth and Security Program at the International Tax and Investment Center and founding principal of International Market Analysis, a boutique advisory firm. On my right, Teva Meyer. You are an Associate Research Fellow at IRIS, an Associate Professor of Geopolitics and Geography at the University of Haute-Alsace in France. You are a specialist of nuclear energy and currently leading multiple programs financed by the French National Agency for Research and the National Center for Scientific Research, and also a program for the European Commission. And next to me, on my left, Franco Michel Sendis, you are a nuclear technology and fuel cycle specialist at the Nuclear Energy Center, a coordinator and main author of the Red Book, a joint report by the NEA and the International Atomic Energy Agency presenting the most recent review of world uranium resources. And we start with you, Franco, to present an overview of the uranium resources, a capacity projection for the 2050 target, and I believe more.
Thank you. Thank you, Frédéric, and thank you to Iris for having me tonight. So what I like to do for the next 15 minutes or so is to give you an overview of the most recent assessment that we do jointly with the IAEA at the NEA on the topic of uranium resources production and demand. I do have some slides if you can bring them up. Thank you. And I'm going to struggle here turning back, but that's fine.
There's no screen.
So I'm showing here two pictures. One of them is a rock, and the other one is a technology. And one does not extract energy from a rock, one extracts energy from a technology. And so the whole issue is, how do we transform this rock, which is a resource, uranium. In this picture you see I am not a geologist. By the way, one of my colleagues and co-author of the Red Book is here with us today, Ms. Katarina Poliakowska. But she is a geologist, and those yellowish patterns in the rock are characteristic of uranium minerals. So how do you transform this rock into a technology? Is essentially what we're going to discuss today. And this is what we call the nuclear fuel cycle, and more specifically, the front end of the nuclear fuel cycle, everything that happens in order to transform that rock into a fuel technology that can go into a reactor to produce fission and heat and then electricity. So you see that there are, when you say uranium fuels energy, it really is through the transformation of this into very complex technologies. And this is a simplified scheme of all the intermediate steps that must happen between mining that rock from the ground so that you can transform it into a fuel technology that goes inside a reactor, becomes irradiated, and then potentially goes finally into waste or is reprocessed and recycled. So I'm going to focus on the front end of the fuel cycle, which is those steps which transform the mineral into fuel before it goes into the reactor. And I'm going to start by showing you the distribution of uranium production in the world among different countries, and also the requirements of how these different countries make use of the uranium for nuclear civil purposes. And so you have in this graph, in blue, in tons of uranium per year, the quantity of uranium that is produced, and that's the blue line, by these different countries in the x-axis. So you very clearly see that the most important one in this graph is Kazakhstan, then followed by other countries. Uzbekistan is also among the top 5. But what you see is that the countries that require uranium because they have nuclear reactors to fuel are almost a separate subgroup of countries. So you have the countries that produce uranium and do not require them because they do not have nuclear energy technologies, and the countries that have nuclear energy technologies for energy production but do not have in their soil uranium production. So this is quite remarkable about a resource such as uranium, this separation between producers and countries. And there is, of course, some exceptions, the most notable one being Canada, which is the only country that actually produces more uranium than it requires for its own domestic purposes. So what this graph tells us also is that by definition, the nuclear fuel cycle, and particularly the front end of the nuclear fuel cycle, is going to be associated with different countries, crossing international boundaries, and therefore geopolitics. Transport is also going to be a very important part of how to move this material into the different steps that will transform uranium into fuel. Let me just say one word about the group that compiles all of this data. It is called the Uranium Group, and as I mentioned earlier, it is coordinated by the Nuclear Energy Agency, where I work, together with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, based in Vienna. And it has been going on for a very long time. It is really 60 years of international collaboration with all of the uranium-producing countries in the world, and even those who are not uranium-producing countries but make use of nuclear technologies are represented. This year, we had a record number of 65 countries submitting official government data to us so that we can compile all of this into a very important publication that we issue every 2 years, which we call within the community the Red Book. And this is just a picture of the cover there. It was very recently published last month, I believe. It is the latest. Well, it also celebrates 60 years of collaboration internationally. So what I'm going to do in the following slides is to show you some graphs that are in this publication. I'm just going to comment them with you today. Let us look at a history of world uranium production through the years. So quantities of uranium production through the years. You can see we can go back historical records through the 1950s, really the birth of civil nuclear energy, and how does the production of uranium coming out of the mines compares to what was then required by the nuclear civil use of this uranium for nuclear reactors for making electricity. So this is what I'm showing here. In blue, it is the production. In red, it is the requirements. There is one also remarkable thing. The production has exceeded for a very long time the requirements. And that explanation is because, of course, the use of uranium at the time, especially in the beginnings, was for military purposes and not for electricity production. But then you can see that around the year 1990s, then production really consistently falls below requirements. That can also be explained, and I will discuss a little bit later how it is possible that gap can be bridged. Essentially, it is done by stockpiles of inventory that has already been produced. But let us take a closer look in the same graph, closer look at the most recent years, and the graph on the left here is still the same as the world, but now if we isolate just a subset of those countries that make up the OECD member countries, then you see that the difference between uranium production and uranium requirements in OECD member countries is really much wider. That means that if OECD countries relied solely on OECD production of uranium, then the gap to bridge would be much more important. That is concerning production. Again, it is tons of uranium coming from the mines. That is very different than the resources, which is the quantity of uranium in the ground. And I'm going to show you now a picture of an estimation of uranium resources. So this is an estimation of how much uranium is in the ground. This is an estimation by geologists, and there are very complex categories of uranium resources because they depend on different factors, such as the confidence of how well established it is that uranium is there. So there is a notion of confidence, and there is also a notion of cost. So I'm not going to go into the details of all of those complexities. I invite you to look at the Red Book. It is downloadable online for free. But this is a figure that you can keep in mind. There are about 8 million tons, all cost categories included, which represent the most confident category of uranium resources in the world globally that we know of today. So if you were to give with greater confidence how much uranium is there in ground today, you would say around 8 million tons that we know of, because we've done explorations and we know where those deposits are and we have quantified them, and geologists have done their work, and we know with great confidence that there are around 8 million tons. Then there is more with lesser confidence and more uncertainty around those costs. Just to mention a graph here which shows the repartition geographically in countries where the resources are also dependent on the costs and costs of extraction of that uranium. And you can see this is also reported by the member countries, the governments themselves, how it changes from country to country. So I mentioned the production of uranium, which is in the orders of tens of thousands of tons per year. that are needed to fuel the nuclear reactors today. And then I mentioned resources, which is in the orders of millions of tons, which are in the ground. So now the question is, how much is that? Is that enough? Is that too little? Well, it depends. It depends what we're planning. If we are planning to triple global nuclear capacity, then those resources might be very limited. If we are stagnating as we were forecasting 5 years ago, then those resources might last longer. So now the whole discussion is, if we are to triple nuclear energy worldwide, where are we going to get the resources from? And so we, of course, go into these questions and ask the different member countries of the uranium group. And in fact, we didn't go to tripling, but we simply asked them, so how much nuclear energy capacity do you plan to build in the next 25 years? So give us your estimations in two scenarios, in a low scenario and a high scenario, meaning a more optimistic scenario. How much do you think you're going to build in terms of nuclear energy, so that we can compare it to the requirements that are needed? And so this is what we came up with in the latest projections, that now even in the low scenario we are forecasting or projecting rather a multiplication by 1.45, so an increase of 45% with respect to 2022 nuclear energy capacity worldwide, and in the high scenario a more than doubling, so times 2.3. And here the color codes represent the different regions. I'm going to compare this to the forecast of what production centers in uranium are telling us as well. And remember that I showed you earlier a gap that has been historically, where that gap is just going to increase in our projections here. So we have the two red lines which represent the requirements this time. So we have the 1.45, the low scenario, and the higher one, 2.3, the higher scenario, compared to also two different scenarios in terms of production of uranium. One which considers the existing mines and the prospective mines, the planned mines, and the other one which considers other potential production centers to be deployed in the future. But all these mines also have a capacity. They have, they are being depleted, so they also have a lifespan. And this is what we come up. So that gap, unless we find new production centers, and for that we need to do much more exploration, is going to increase. And this is for a doubling the nuclear energy. Of course, tripling nuclear energy would be even more challenging. So what it means now, and I have just a couple of more slides before I finish, is if we do the calculation of the cumulative resources, how that we know of today, just to get an order of idea how much this would last. And if we take the high scenario, which is more than doubling, and we compare it to the known resources in the ground, then what this graph shows us is that if we intend to meet the high scenario demand, then our resources would be depleted before the end of this century, towards the 2090s. This is with an assumption that we would meet the high increase level, the high level target there in 2050, and then we would keep at that level for the rest of the century. This is just to illustrate that the tripling or the doubling of nuclear energy capacities worldwide will require a lot of exploration in terms of resources, and those countries that do have much of resources are going to play a key part in that enabling of this nuclear renaissance. I'm going to finish quickly. Let's just not forget, but this is a topic for another conversation. All of the other intermediate steps in that nuclear fuel cycle transformation is not only about the uranium mining, it's also about converting uranium, which is a technical term that describes the conversion to gaseous hexafluoride so that it can be enriched. Then you have the enrichment capacities that are also needed to be built. And what I'm showing here, is that these infrastructures and facilities and capacities are also dominated by specific countries and companies. looking at the future, if I have a couple of more minutes, then we hear a lot about small modular reactors. Many of them are designed to use a specific form of enriched uranium, which is higher than current reactors use, which is called HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium. This is uranium that is more enriched than what the current industrial standard is, which is more or less 5%. So this is uranium enriched between 5 and 20%. What does mean? And this picture here shows a lot of dots. All of these dots represent an SMR concept. And you can see that, well, they are all, many of them above 5% and below the 20%. So this means that not only these new technologies would need more enrichment, but they could potentially also need more natural uranium per unit energy produced. This was a study that was conducted also by the NEA in a report called the HALEU report. I'm going to leave you with the reference at the end of my talk here. But what it shows is that the consumption of natural uranium per unit energy produced for current light water reactors is around a standard value which is below 200 tons, and some of these tons per unit energy produced, gigawatt electric year, and some of these reactors are way above that. So in a context of limited uranium resources, you have some technologies that would consume even more. This is with some assumptions where the fuel cycle that they use is called a once through, meaning you use it once and then you throw the fuel as waste. Just going to conclude now with the Red Book main conclusions. We issued this on April 8th, saying we have enough uranium in the ground, but the industry, the community needs to mobilize in order to find more uranium in future years and decades if we are to enable that nuclear energy growth. And so the Financial Times quoted us and did a very nice article on this. This is the overview of the challenges of enabling the nuclear renaissance. You saw the specific countries that play a key part there and of course relate to the topic today of Central Asia. And for later reference, here are some of the other reports that we've published recently. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Franco, for this very interesting introduction. So now, Tela, you are going to present us the report. You've been one of the main author of this report. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Frederick, and thank you very much, Franco. And I would like to extend my thanks to the whole NEA team for the job you're doing with the Red Book, because I don't know if you're aware of how important the work is for the very small community of researchers that are working on the geopolitics of nuclear energy. I mean, without you guys and without those information, we would be blind, completely blind. So thanks a lot. So yeah, I will. Can you just give me the? Thank you. What I'm gonna do for the 20 next minutes is trying to walk you through the main takeaways of the report. So the report is already online. You can download it on the IRIS website. It's, I guess, published on LinkedIn too. Any social networks that you're familiar with, you can go there and check the report. So the main things. The main thing that I want to walk you through are those five points. The first one is trying to reflect on how did Central Asia become the hotspot of the world nuclear industry. Then trying to discuss a little bit what are the limits of this situation, and will Central Asia be able to continue fueling the nuclear renaissance? Moving on to the very hot topic of the exports of uranium from Central Asia to Western countries, then discussing the development of nuclear power in Central Asia, and finally the question of using nuclear energy for regional integration in Central Asia. So that's mainly actually the plan of the report. So you can check it online. So first, the thing that is important to understand is that Central Asia became the hub of nuclear industry in the world because of its post-Soviet legacy. So quickly to just walk you through two important things to have in mind. The first thing is that during the whole Soviet era, about 65% of the whole uranium used by the USSR was mined in Central Asia, and 42% of it was mined in Kazakhstan. So this region was fundamental for the Soviet atomic industry. The second point is that, of course, Kazakhstan was the place of nuclear testing, and the Semipalatinsk polygon was the place where the nuclear bomb, the Soviet nuclear bomb, was developed. So Kazakhstan and Central Asia gained legitimacy to talk about nuclear issue because of this dramatic past. The third point that allows Kazakhstan to be the global leader of nuclear energy that it is today is the fact that the post-independence government in Kazakhstan decided to dismantle the Soviet nuclear arsenal that they received after their independence. So by deciding to leaving aside the nuclear arsenal, they gain prestige, they gain legitimacy, they also gain technical expertise, which was very, very important at that time. And of course, they also decided it because they guess that they will have security help, but with the Budapest Memorandum, by leaving the nuclear arsenal, then they will be protected by the Budapest Memorandum. We all know that this did not happen for Ukraine. Then finally, what is important is that after the independence, Kazakhstan was really a leader in helping building the non-proliferation regime, whether it is by hosting thing that you can see in the picture there, the lower enriched uranium fuel bank in Oskomen, but also by leading the research for the Treaty on Binding Nuclear Tests. So they were absolutely central for the non-proliferation regime. And all of that helped Kazakhstan rebuild its nuclear industry after the independence. Few things that were very, very important for Kazakhstan after the independence was to access to foreign technologies to ramp up the uranium production, and also to access to foreign investment to produce more uranium. And it was brilliant success. I mean, Kazakhstan created Kazatomprom, the uranium producing company in Kazakhstan in 1997, and less than 10 years after, they were the leader of uranium production in the world. So it's an absolute success story. At the beginning of the millennium, they managed to get rid of all the anti-dumping laws that were preventing part of the selling of uranium from Kazakhstan to Europe and to the US. And then afterward, from 2004 to 2008, they managed to build joint ventures with Chinese, Russian, European, and Japanese companies, helping them having the technology but also having the investment needed to ramp up the production. So this very moment after the independence were absolutely fundamental to understand the way that this region became the hotspot of uranium in the world. The second point is that we can reflect on whether or not Kazakhstan will remain at the top of the uranium producer in the world. So quick, all the data are from the Red Book. So again, kudos to the Red Book. So a quick picture. So Kazakhstan in 2023, it's about 35 to 40% of the uranium production in the world. It's a little bit on the downside. It's diminishing mostly because Canada is ramping up its production. So we have more production coming up from Canada, so a little less from Kazakhstan. How did they get there? Being the first producer of uranium, one of the important things is that, going back to geology, the production of uranium in Kazakhstan is really cheap. So it's about 30 of the 50 cheapest uranium mines in the world are located in Kazakhstan using the ICL, the in situ leaching technology. So it's quite cheap to produce there. And during the depression of the uranium prices that followed Fukushima's accident, when the uranium markets almost collapsed in the world. Consumption moved to where it was the cheapest, so it moved to Kazakhstan. And during a large period, Kazakhstan decided to downgrade its production, to make production cuts to support market prices. And the Kazatomprom, the Kazakh uranium company, decided to stop cutting production, to ramp up production to its full capacity in the upcoming years. But there's actually three problems that is limiting its capacity to produce more uranium. The first problem, and the main problem, is that when you are producing uranium, you need sulfuric acid. You need sulfuric acid for the in-situ leaching technology. So basically, you are injecting liquid into the soil, then you're pumping up the liquid afterward, and then in this liquid you have uranium, but you also need acid to do it. And there's a supply problem of acid in Kazakhstan today for many reasons. One of the reasons is that acid is used for other usages, mainly food-producing industry. So there's a problem on that side. The second problem is that the opening of new mines in Kazakhstan are delayed, and particularly one large mine, the Buneskoye mine, which is a joint venture with Rosatom. There are conflicts with one of the subcontractors of Rosatom today, mostly the subcontractors who are the drilling subcontractors. So there's problem in the drilling industry right now. And then the third problem, the third challenge that we are facing is that Kazakhstan is changing its tax laws for uranium. It will significantly increase the amount of taxes that the foreign companies involved in the uranium industry in Kazakhstan will have to pay, and that might have consequences. Just to also have it in mind, uranium is really a full part of Kazakhstan multi-vector diplomacy. So what Kazakhstan did after the independence is that it signed joint ventures with countries, with Russia, with China, but also with Japan, with France. So there are only 2 mines in Kazakhstan which are fully operated by Kazatomprom. All the other mines are operated in joint ventures. So that's one point. Second point is that even though you might see a lot of those news in newspapers saying that China and Russia are the ones who are accessing to all the uranium in Kazakhstan, the reality is that there are more than 24 different nuclear reactor operators who are buying their uranium from Kazakhstan. Lately, there were a negotiation for a 10 years long contract with Romania to access to the Kazakh uranium, and there are more than 11 countries who are depending on Kazakhstan for their uranium. So that's a huge important point. Even though, as you can see on the graph behind me, of course, China and Russia are the ones who are consuming the most of this uranium. I will not go into the detail of that, but one point which is also important to keep in mind is that beside Kazakhstan, there's Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is only 7% of the global production today of uranium, but they are planning on doubling the production by the end of the decade, mostly through the restructuration of their industry, but also by trying to gain more money in mining uranium, and particularly by co-producing rare earth minerals. And they're also trying to follow the footsteps of Kazakhstan and also building joint ventures. You've seen it in the news. You've seen that the French Orano have signed a joint ventures with Navoyur and the Uzbek uranium company. So they're trying to follow the footsteps. We're not that sure that we'll be able to ramp up the production that much, but that's an important point. And then you have the 2 other countries that Frederick mentioned, Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan. Mongolia is, of course, the one who's will be the closest to producing uranium, even though we are all aware that creating a uranium mines is quite of a hustle, and it takes about 10 years from start to the end of the construction. So it might not be tomorrow that we'll see Mongolian uranium flowing into Western nuclear reactors. Moving on to the third point, which is also quite important and that we're developing into the report, is problems with how we are moving the uranium from Central Asia to the conversion plants that Franco mentioned. So just to to picture the very, very beautiful, oh, sorry, wrong slide. To picture the very beautiful rock that Franco just showed you before, then it is turned into a powder. It's not always a yellow powder. It's mostly a green, black, dark also powder. It is drummed, and then after the drum are sent to conversion plants. In Kazakhstan, so we have two problems when moving uranium. The first problem is that uranium is what we call a class 7 good. Class 7 is radioactive materials. When you are transporting radioactive materials, there's a lot of things that you have to do, and that cost a lot of money to do it. So there are few ports who are accepting class 7 materials, and there are also few maritime carriers who are accepting those materials. And the other problem is that it's quite a small quantities. If you take the whole requirements that Franco just presented you before of uranium for a year, it will fit into 2,100 containers. So that's quite small. I mean, well, comparing to oil or to gas. So that's a problem when we have to move uranium. The thing is that for almost most of the time, the uranium from Central Asia was sent to the Western countries through the Russian corridor. The Russian corridor is quite easy. You take the uranium, you put it on train. The train goes up to St. Petersburg. In St. Petersburg, it is put on boat, then move to France or move to the US or to Canada or elsewhere in the world. By 2018, Kazakhstan created a new corridor through the Caspian Sea. It was not for geopolitical reason, it was because of the Soccer World Cup. Because the Soccer World Cup in Russia, the port of St. Petersburg was close to class 7 materials, so they decided to move it to the Black Sea and to the Caspian Sea. It is a multimodal corridor. You can see it on the slide. So if you want to cross the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, you have to put your uranium on train, then find a boat to cross the Caspian Sea, then crossing Azerbaijan and Georgia on train again, then find a boat, charter boats most of the time, who accept to transport your uranium through the Black Sea and then to the Mediterranean, all the way then to the Western conversion plants. As of today, there are no sanctions that prevent uranium from moving through the Russian corridors. There's absolutely no sanction on that. So it's not forbidden to use the Russian corridor. Nevertheless, what happened is that Canada and Cameco's, which is the main uranium producing company in Canada, which have the joint venture in Kazakhstan, asked the Kazakhstan Prom to revive the Trans-Caspian corridor. So that they are the one who actually did the job of reviving it. But we have like three main problems with this corridor. The first one, it's costs. It's almost 5 times more costly to move your uranium through the Black Sea than moving it through the Russian corridor. First problem. Second problem, there are administrative bottlenecks when you have to move through Georgia and Azerbaijan. And the third problem, of course, is finding maritime company who accepting to cross the Black Sea today, which is also quite a problem, and finding the insurance that will insure your boat through these seas. There's talk about how to move uranium, and one of the possibility that we can discuss afterward is moving it eastwards. So moving through the Chinese corridor, which is also a problem for a lot of elements, but the idea is to move it through the port of Shanghai and then afterwards to the Western conversion plant in Canada or in the US. The fourth point that we are discussing in the report is the development of nuclear reactors in Central Asia. So as of today, there are no commercial nuclear reactor plants in Central Asia. There used to be one in Kazakhstan. There used to be a reactor, an RNR reactor in Aktau in Kazakhstan. And there's one main issue, I mean, one of the main more important issue is the problem that the country in Central Asia, the electrical grids are completely fragmented. They're also outdated infrastructures. So there's a huge problem on that element. And also there are very large concerns over energy security because those countries are still relying a lot on gas and on coal to produce electricity. So Kazakhstan started its new nuclear program really early in 2012. But actually left it aside for most of the year. And in 2024, there was a referendum, quite successful because 72% of the voters, I guess it was 72, yeah, 72% of the voters voted yes on creating nuclear reactors in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is now in the process of selecting the reactors vendors. They are shortlisted. They have shortlisted a few reactors producers and vendors. Of course, French are in the game, but mostly also the Russian, Chinese, and the South Korean producers. In the region, there are also two other countries who are projecting on building nuclear reactors. First one is Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan will not build full-scale nuclear reactors. It will build probably 6 of the SMR that Franco just presented before. The main elements, mechanical of the elements of the SMR are in the process of being produced right now in Russia. And the first work are done in Uzbekistan to build those SMR. Kyrgyzstan also decided to build an SMR. It's not on the same schedule that Uzbekistan, but the important thing to keep in mind is that both in Uzbekistan and in Kyrgyzstan, it will be Russia that will be building these SMR. Finally, and to conclude, what we're also looked into in the report is how the countries in Central Asia might be able, sorry, thanks. Problem with 2 computers. The way that the countries in Central Asia might be able to use nuclear energy to have a little more of regional integration. And the lucky thing is that we have an experience with that. I mean, in the European Union was partly built on trying to build a cooperation over nuclear energy. So what we saw in Europe might be done also in Central Asia. One of the ideas that we're addressing is maybe doing regional cooperation to build common nuclear power plants. We saw that happen in Europe. We saw that happen between France and Germany. We saw it also happen between Sweden and Denmark, between France and Belgium. So that's one of the possibility to share the expertise, but also to share the costs of building the nuclear reactors. The second possibility is to establish a Central Asian nuclear fuel supply agency, building on the model of Europe also, which might be a way of not being dependent on Russian fuel supply chain, also that Franco pictured in the graph just before. Also discussing on trying to have a common management strategy for nuclear wastes and not having separate strategies and also separate disposals for nuclear wastes. And most importantly, also developing a training consortium and a research consortium over Central Asian, nuclear between Central Asian countries to build locally trained engineers, locally trained workers for this new industry and nuclear power industry. So thank you very much for listening. You will find everything in the reports that you can download and read right now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Teva, for this very interesting part. Before going further with Ariel, I would like just to remind people online you can already write questions directly on Zoom, so feel free to ask questions. We'll take around 10 minutes after Ariel's presentation to answer a few questions for this first panel. So now let's go to you, Ariel, to speak more about the necessity of the nuclear renaissance and cooperation with Central Asia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frédéric. I want to thank Teva for an excellent report. Thank you, Franco, for your excellent presentation. We are working at the International Tax and Investment Center, the program that I lead, Energy Growth and Security, on strategic minerals, on nuclear renaissance, on LNG, on whatever is a current and important component of the ever-changing global energy economy. And our involvement in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan goes back to early 90s when both the president of ITIC, Dan Witt, and myself started traveling there and engaging with Kazakhstan. It was a very different part of the world back then. They just came out of the Soviet imperial dependency. The then president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, got rid of nuclear weapons, cut deals with American oil companies, and formulated with his then foreign minister, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, currently the president Tokayev, the multi-vector policies that Kazakhstan is following and other countries in the region are emulating. What is important is how Central Asia keeps coming back as a crucial resource supplier to the world, first in oil and gas, if you look at Turkmenistan and across the lake, Azerbaijan, oil in Kazakhstan, of course, and now uranium. Why is it important? It's important, as Franco mentioned and other sources demonstrate, that we are facing a massive increase of energy demand, of electricity demand, and nuclear is probably the most effective zero emissions baseload. The renewables are all fine and dandy, but when the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing and your battery capacity is for about 43 minutes of consumption, like it is on average in the United States, if you take all the capacity with all the industrial batteries and average it out in the States, it's 43 minutes of consumption. So nuclear becomes very attractive. There were massive failures with Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima, but there is a renaissance of recognition of the importance of nuclear and the new generation of SMRs that were mentioned here that are coming back, and the world will need more and more uranium. So the concern about Kazakhstan and Central Asia, as you heard, is that the 4 finalists, China, Russia, North Korea, and France, for 2 reactors are probably going to be Russia and China in Kazakhstan. The SMRs in Uzbekistan are going to be Russia. So how the West can be engaged? You may say, why an American cares about how Europe, for example, or France are engaged in Central Asia. And the answer is, whatever the current administration is saying, there is such a thing as the West, even we have deep policy disagreements between Washington and Brussels, or Washington and Paris or London. And the general commitment to the vision of the West, I think, will supersede whatever administrations we may have right now, wherever we have them. And therefore, the leader of nuclear energy in Europe, France, could play a role in Central Asia, and in Kazakhstan in particular, if she so decides. And that role involves engagement, monetary commitment, monitoring, and deals. We heard that over 50% of the current Kazakh uranium reserves are committed to China, and the main processor of nuclear fuel that originates in the ore that originates in Kazakhstan, the formatting of the fuel is in Russia and has been for decades. And these are the ties that go deep. They go all the way decades back to the Soviet era, but nevertheless, with the multi-vector policy that I mentioned before, Kazakhstan is interested in engagement with non-Russia, non-China players, including Korea and France. So we are looking at low 20,000s of tons of uranium in 24, produced in Kazakhstan, largest producer, largest reserves. The projection for this year is between 25 and 26,000 tons of uranium. With Uzbekistan, it's lower. It's in 3,000 plus tons. But the projection of consumption of electricity consumption, when you go to Central Asia, as I do, you hear about interruptions of energy supply all the time. And they need to address that, including through building nuclear reactors. They're also building thermal stations. But I hope you agree that in a country like Kazakhstan, where 60 or 70% of electricity is generated from coal, it will be a great step forward in terms of emissions if a larger percentage of electricity is going to be generated by nuclear reactors. The other question I want to address is the outlook for economic development. The economic development in Central Asia, specifically in Kazakhstan, is towards technology. When several years ago, for those of you who track, colleagues here that I see who track, the Kaspi Bank, that's all online bank, went to London Stock Exchange, and I think they floated in Astana International Financial Centers. It was between $4 and $5 billion. That's money for a bank, for online finance, fintech. And Google, Amazon, and others are investing now $1.5 billion into the largest tech center in Astana. And there are software operations in Uzbekistan. And they proudly told me that they have programmers who work for $300 a month. And I was kind of horrified, but of course, your AI will work for cheaper than that. So maybe the low-cost IT developed in Central Asia will fill the niche between the software that is written by AI and software that is written by human beings, but there is a niche for cheaper tech and software development services that these countries are currently filling. So, to make a long story short, I am not aware, maybe there is a program and you're going to tell us about it. I'm not aware of an EU strategic program how to develop uranium in Central Asia and benefit France, the French nuclear industry, and the rest of Europe. Of course, the Germans would tell you that there's no such thing as nuclear industry or shouldn't exist. How did that work out for Germany? ? I'm not going to get into that. But for those who are buying uranium ore and want to develop more nuclear fuel, including from the resources in Central Asia, my suggestion is share the technology you have to engage these countries and allow them to move up the technological chain. That's what they're expecting. They do not want just to dig and ship. They want go up the chain and manufacture in Kazakhstan. It can be done because the Chinese are doing it, not at a large scale, but they are forming nuclear fuel in Kazakhstan. Europe can be the lead in environmental standards. And I would encourage those who can provide the expertise, the regulatory, the technological aspects of safety. Why is it important? Because we see when it fails in Fukushima, in Chernobyl, etc. We don't want countries that are maybe somewhat on a lower level of overall technological development start with a technology that is important for them and, God forbid, fail. We don't want to go there. So Europe can play a great role in that. The corridors were mentioned. There are things that can be done to improve the speed and the ease of operations of transportation corridors, including getting nuclear materials out of Central Asia. I have a friend in Washington who has been doing this for decades. It can be done. It is done. It can be expanded and streamlined instead of going to Russia and to China. What else? Just a side comment. Somebody mentioned that the grid in Kazakhstan is problematic. It is, but one thing Europe can do is sell technology, be it Siemens, be it French companies, to improve, connect, and optimize the grid. The grid in the 21st century that takes into account green energy, that can handle intermittency, is not the old Soviet grid that the USSR built in Kazakhstan, sometimes early in the 20s and the 30s with slave labor, gulag, or the labor of forcibly sedentized nomads of Kazakhstan. This is a very different situation right now with people much better educated. And speaking of education, that'll be my last point, when you're looking at much younger countries like Kazakhstan and especially Uzbekistan and others, these countries need clear pathways in education to get people good technical and professional education that makes those economies develop and keeps radicals at bay. So if Western technical institutes, universities, ministries, etc., can develop collaborative programs with these countries to train their technicians and their engineers, it'll go a long way to build the goodwill that will lead to more projects and more cooperation and making more money between Europe and Central Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariel. So we have a few minutes for questions. So let's start here in our amphitheater. Does anyone have any question? Or it can be around the table also if one of our guest speakers would like to ask questions to others. Not in the room. So we have just, yes? Thank you very much. So maybe the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Akhur. I'm from Tajikistan and born in Uzbekistan. I'm really enjoying the discussion here, but not, I hope I wasn't late when like about the water management and stuff. We are having a lot of issues because of the scarcity of the water and of course the Soviet heritage in terms of the water management in Central Asia. Do you take into account that part of while like developing the nuclear reactors and stuff? Because I think, as far as I know, I can be wrong again, it's a huge discussion also in France as well in terms of like water and stuff, the cooling and of course the old reactor, but like.
I'm very glad you asked this question because in the fall of 24, we published a report and presented it at the Atlantic Council. So if you Google Wesley's name, my name, and Alejandro Wes, you there? Okay. And Alejandro, you will find that report. I don't have time now to go into all the details, but we're basically saying that water is an absolutely crucial commodity in Central Asia, especially in a country like Uzbekistan, that is double landlocked. There is climate change. The glaciers in the mountains are shrinking. The population is growing fast. The Aral Sea is a disaster, and it is really a disaster. I mean, for those of you who have a strong stomach, go online and look at the pictures of the Aral Sea. The Caspian water table is shrinking. So yes, you're absolutely right. There's an interconnection between the question of water and the water is needed for reactors, but at the same time, you can use water that is not fresh water to cool. You can build closed cycles, right? You could introduce my big hobby horse, replace old Soviet irrigation canals that are not even built to prevent water seepage by lining them with materials that prevent water seepage. You will save 40% of water that is currently wasted. Drip irrigation as opposed to arik or canal irrigation will save you huge amounts of water. So there are resources in terms of saving, optimization, and recycling of water. There are countries in the world that did very great progress on water technologies, and they're open to export these technologies. So very good question. Look at our report, but yes, things can be done in Central Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Tela, you wanted to add something?
Just to add a little thing. So we actually know how to build nuclear reactors in high temperature areas. You can check one of the most example is Palo Verde in Arizona. Oh yeah, the Baraka nuclear reactors in UAE. So we know how to do it. The important thing is to design the nuclear power plants for this situation. In Europe, we have a problem because our nuclear power plants were designed in the 1960s and 70s, and they were not built for high temperature.
Is there any other question? Yes.
Oh, sorry. Just a question. In the first presentation, it was shown that Canada was producing more than the requirements. And in the second, that Kazakhstan was exporting uranium to Canada. So just wanted to ask, why is Kazakhstan exporting uranium to Canada?
Okay, so the important thing to keep in mind is what Franco mentioned. We are not using uranium. We're using uranium, which is first converted, then enriched, then transformed into a nuclear fuel. Canada is the world powerhouse for uranium conversion. They have they have one of the largest conversion plants in the world. So Kazakhstan is exporting to Canada for two reasons. First reason is that one of the Canadian companies have joint ventures in Kazakhstan. So Cameco have the Inkai joint venture, so they are sending it there. And the second reason is that in the rest of the Western world, there's not enough conversion capacity. So we have to move it to Canada.
Okay. Maybe one question online. What about United States supply of uranium? Where it's coming from? What's the current difficulties? So,
yeah, typical. We're talking about Central Asia, and the whataboutism, kicks in. What about? Absolutely correct question. What about U.S. rare earth supply and mining? What about uranium? We have something called NIMBY. Who knows what NIMBY is? Not in my backyard. So some people want to go and dig for uranium or rare earth or whatever. And the environmentalists, environmental activists, maybe the state itself, especially if it's a state government of certain persuasion, not of other persuasion, and sometimes maybe even the red states, putting blocks on these developments. As a result, in rare earth, something we write about a lot, as a result, since the 1990s, China managed to build the capacity that was 70 or 80%, now it's going down to 60% of mining and close to between 80 and 90% of refining of rare earths, which are absolutely crucial for your iPhones, for space, for weapons, you name it. With uranium, it's a similar situation, and I'll give you one more in the spirit of self-flagellation. We could not figure out how to store spent fuel. They spent, I think, $30 billion, if I'm not mistaken, for a place called Yucca Mountain. First of all, it's a horrible name. Who calls anything Yucca? It's a Yucca Mountain. It's in Nevada. And it was supposed to be this deep caves in the mountain. And then it was stopped through legal action. And nuclear fuel is stored mostly in barrels near the reactors right now. It's crazy, right? So these are the examples of how not to manage your uranium mining, your rare earth mining, your nuclear spent fuel storage, etc. Was that self-flagellation enough?
A little bit. Quick answer. So, because of the low cost of uranium in the market, all of the mines in the US were closed. So, right now, the US is mostly importing its uranium from Canada, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which are the main exporters. The Trump administration have not yet figured out how to ramp up uranium production in the US. I mean, there's a difficulty within the Republican Party on how to, should we subsidize? Should we create a uranium reserve? What's the best way of ramping up the production of uranium? And there's no answer right now. I mean, there are reopening mines, but it's epsilon when you're looking at the production compared to the needs.
Thank you. Another question online. Is there any other producer, country with deposits out of Central Asia which can play a role in the future? Like I have the example of Brazil, for instance. Those other country can have an interesting position to export uranium?
Well, I mean, there are many deposits that would need to be brought into production, and these are distributed around the world. The uranium, the Red Book does the job of listing some of those. I also know that there are other databases at the IAEA that list databases of geology formations. That would be useful. I do not think there is only one country. Let's not confuse production with resources. So currently, Kazakhstan is the world's highest producer of uranium, meaning that they're bringing out, tens of thousands of tons per year. But the reality in the resources, as I briefly showed during the slide, is that they are not dominant. The currently dominant one is Australia, and followed by others, Namibia, Canada as well. Kazakhstan is there, but not in the first place. So they are bringing out a lot of production, which potentially signals, but they know and they have reported it, that their mine or their mines will have a limited lifespan within the next maybe 20 years or so. I don't know if that answers that question, but
sounds good to me. Is there any last quick question in the room before we go to the next panel? No? So we can take just a few minutes in order to change our panel. All right, so we'll go to the second panel dedicated to geopolitical dynamic in Central Asia. And to introduce this new panel, Sébastien, floor is yours.
All right. Can you hear me? I guess so. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to thank Ariel for having invited me to present in this event. So I just want to tell you that I'm not a specialist in the nuclear sector, but what I'm going to try to do, is to broaden a little bit the topic by exploring how energy, so not only nuclear, but also hydrocarbons or even green energy, function as a central pillar, both material and symbolic, of regional and transregional connectivity. So first, I'm going to look at the shifting transit geographies that are emerging after the war in Ukraine, and the rising role of China, and the growing appeal of other corridors, for example, through Iran and Turkey. And second, I'm going to examine how energy production and energy connectivity is increasingly intertwined with regional coordination and even state legitimacy narratives. Energy actually is shaping not just how Central Asian countries connect to the world, but how they define, how Central Asia defines its place within it. So let me maybe begin with the big picture here, which is energy as a foundation for regional and interregional connectivity. The politics of pipelines and transit infrastructure in Central Asia is undergoing, as you know, significant realignments shaped by, of course, the war in Ukraine, also growing Chinese dominance, and again, the rise of alternative corridors. First, Central Asia, when you look at a map of Central Asia, it obviously faces a challenging geography. What I mean here is that it is landlocked. And in the case of Uzbekistan, it's even doubly landlocked. So from independence, the 5 states have depended on a lot, actually, on transit routes to and through Russia. Kazakhstan's oil exports reach foreign markets through the Caspian pipeline consortium, which ends on Russia's Black Sea coast. But since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Central Asian countries have become more, I would say, at least hesitant to align their future with Moscow, including in terms of energy partnerships. But paradoxically, however, this weakening has also triggered a kind of renewed Russian push to reassert influence over the region's energy flows. For example, Russia interrupted the Caspian pipeline consortium flow several times since February 2022, trying in a way, to send a strong message to Astana that Moscow could control Kazakhstan's main source of revenue. Moscow has also advanced new ideas such as Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan gas union to provide a winter gas supplies to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. I guess that's what Ariel was mentioning, that because these two countries are facing the issues, but that was also a way for Moscow to reintegrate Central Asia into Russia's energy orbit. At the same time, China's dominance in Central Asia energy infrastructure has become more entrenched. For, I would say, at least for more than 15 years. An example here is the launch of the China Central Asian gas pipeline in 2009. Beijing has become the largest single buyer of Turkmen gas. China is also a key investor in oil production and refining in Kazakhstan. And of course, the Belt and Road Initiative has further deepened China's role, not just as a consumer, but also as a builder of the region's energy connectivity. And for countries like Turkmenistan, China is an essential partner, but it also creates a single market dependency that limits bargaining power and raises questions about long-term sovereignty. That being said, Central Asian states, of course, recognize the risks of independence from either Moscow and Beijing, and they are now increasingly looking to alternative corridors. So, for example, some Central Asian states are looking at the Iranian routes. Of course, sanctions and infrastructure gaps remain very significant obstacles, but Turkmenistan has engaged in swap deals where it delivers gas to northern Iran in exchange for supplies sent to Azerbaijan, so really circumventing traditional routes. Similarly, the middle corridor, which is stretching from Central Asia through the Caspian Sea, and the South Caucasus and Turkey to Europe, is increasingly seen as energy and transport axis. This corridor is particularly attractive to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which are eager to access European markets without relying on Russian infrastructure. And another important point here to consider is also the global energy transition. Of course, Central Asian countries are engaged in renewables and climate diplomacy, not only for environmental reasons, but also to boost economic diversification and geopolitical relevance. And so this great shift creates new opportunities for regional integration through, for example, let's say, shared grids or through seasonal electricity swaps. And Europe actually has begun to propose alternative frameworks such as the EU's Global Gateway, which really emphasizes transparency and sustainability. So what we are witnessing now is a kind of fragmentation, of the old energy geography rather than a single dominant route, be it Russia, Chinese or otherwise. We are more likely to see a more diverse connectivity landscape emerge in the region. So the region's challenge is to manage this complexity in a way that supports regional cooperation and ensures that energy remains a tool for development, not dependence. That being said, some regional connectivity projects can struggle, of course, to move forward. An example here is a TAPI pipeline, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, which is a project where energy is a driver, but geopolitics in a way is a bottleneck. TAPI has long symbolized, the potential of Central Asia to export its surplus natural gas to the growing markets of South Asia. But for Turkmenistan, which, as I said, remains heavily dependent on Chinese gas purchases, the pipeline represents a hope of diversification. But despite years of planning, of repeated groundbreaking ceremonies, the project remains stalled, and political instability in Afghanistan, tensions between India and Pakistan, and many questions over financing have repeatedly derailed progress. Another major example is the Kazakh 1000, Kazakh meaning Central Asia, South Asia, which is a cross-border electricity transmission project designed to export surplus summer hydropower from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Afghanistan and Pakistan. So Kazakh 1000 is both a symbol of optimism and a case study in fragility. The project is, of course, technically feasible. It enjoys strong backing from international financial institutions. It aligns also with broader climate goals. But here again, energy becomes a bottleneck when it intersects with fragility on the ground. And the situation again in Afghanistan, especially questions about this country reliability as a transit partner combined with intra-regional concerns and disputes over water usage and seasonal electricity needs complicated cooperation between upstream and downstream states. So yes, energy demands create strong incentives for cooperation, but the infrastructure to support this cooperation in several projects can be vulnerable to political fragmentation and security concerns. A third point I would like to address very briefly here is on human capital. I mean, talking about energy is not talking it's not only talking about molecules. It also revolves around the people responsible for managing production and transportation. And of course, nowhere is this, more visible than in this emerging nuclear energy agenda that we have in Central Asia. So, developing nuclear energy requires deep specializations, meaning of nuclear physicists, reactor engineers, etc. And today, Central Asia faces a deficit in this area. Many of the region experts were actually trained during the Soviet regime, meaning that they are no retired or really nearing retirement. So some educational institutions are of course improving in the region, but are not yet producing enough new specialists to fill these gaps. Plus, you have an issue of brain drain from Central Asia. So this takes me actually to a deeper point, which is that investing in human capital for nuclear energy doesn't just serve domestic goals, but it also lay the groundwork and transnational cooperation and also for regional connectivity. Global powers are already actually competing to fill the skill gaps. Of course, Russia and China are actively training Central Asian professionals as part of their nuclear diplomacy. This is not necessarily negative, by the way, but without diversification, it risks creating asymmetrical dependencies. And this is also an opportunity, I think, for Western partners, international organizations, and regional institutions to support Central Asia's training and regulatory development, not just as a technical need, but as a strategic investment in regional stability and energy production. And finally, let me end on maybe a more political note. In recent years, so Central Asian states have increasingly leveraged international energy and climate platforms as tools of soft power to reshape their global image, to attract investments, and also to assert their relevance in international discussions on sustainability and connectivity. A prime example here is the Astana International Forum, which Kazakhstan has positioned as a convening space for a global dialogue on energy transition and multilateral cooperation. This forum really allows Kazakhstan to showcase its ambition to become a regional green energy hub, to underline its commitment to climate goals, and to present itself as a reliable partner to the EU, to China, to the Gulf states, and to multilateral institutions. So, and connectivity or narratives also serve a regional legitimizing functions. What I mean is that initiatives like the Trans-Caspian Corridor, Kazakh 1000, and electricity market integration are presented not only as economic imperative, but also as expressions of a renewed Central Asian solidarity. This rhetoric supports an emerging regional identity distinct from past dependencies on Russia and on China. And by promoting themselves as energy bridges between East and West, or as green transit hubs linking South Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, these regimes signal that they are not merely surviving in a multipolar world, but actively shaping it. And domestically, this narrative offers a tool for legitimation. So in authoritarian or semi-authoritarian contexts where electoral competition is limited, demonstrating tangible achievements in connectivity, whether it's a new transmission line or transnational pipeline or major international summit, all of that becomes a symbol of competence and vision. Investments in energy infrastructure and regional trade corridors are framed as national accomplishments that deliver jobs, that attract investments, and that modernize the economy. So this helps Central Asian regimes to shift the political discourse away from democratic accountability toward a performance based more on legitimacy, grounded in development and geopolitical relevance. Sorry. And in this context, civil nuclear energy is emerging really as a new legitimacy frontier. I mean, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in particular have woven nuclear energy into their strategic visions, not only as means to ensure long-term energy security and decarbonization, but also as a symbol of technological progress and global relevance. I would say, but I really need to finish, but I would say that also this legitimacy strategy is not systematically without risk. For example, when connectivity promises outpace implementation, or when large-scale projects exacerbate inequality or environmental harm, these narratives can generate domestic frustration. An example here is that the export of electricity in Tajikistan is contested in a country where energy security is far from being guaranteed. So, yes, I'm sorry, I really need to conclude, but in Central Asia today, energy and the transportation of energy are far more than a matter of supply and demand. It's a real geopolitical currency. It's a symbol of sovereignty. And it's a tool again for regional imagination. So from contesting transit routes to emerging green corridors and nuclear ambitions, the energy landscape is shaping how the region connects, competes, and legitimizes itself. So really the region of Central Asia now stands at a crossroad. I mean, the challenge now is to transform energy from a source of dependency into a driver of diversification, from a narrative of power into a platform for partnership. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. So now I would like to give the microphone, if I can say, to Mr. Sarabekov, to give us a few insights about Kazakhstan commitment for energy resilience and nuclear non-proliferation. Mr. Sarabekov, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, good evening. Though it's almost the middle of the night in Astana. It's a pleasure to join you today and talk about a subject that is both deeply rooted in Kazakhstan history and crucial to our common future. Nuclear energy. And when we speak about Central Asia's contribution to the global nuclear energy renaissance, Kazakhstan naturally comes to the forefront, not just because of our vast uranium reserves, but because of the choices we made as a nation and the direction we continue to follow. As you mentioned before, after the gaining its independence, Kazakhstan inherited the fourth largest nuclear arsenal in the world, along with the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. And yet, instead of holding on to these weapons, Kazakhstan made a different choice. We chose disarmament. Within just a few years, we dismantled our arsenal, shut down the test site, and joined the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation as a non-nuclear state. And this was a truly visionary decision, and we should highlight the role played by our first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who believed that Kazakhstan's security should be built not on weapons, but on trust and diplomacy. And that belief remains as the center of our foreign policy to this day. And under the leadership of President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, Kazakhstan continues to uphold and expand this legacy. President Tokayev repeatedly reaffirmed Kazakhstan's dedication to non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful nuclear development. and we call it core pillars of our international identity. Now, fast forward to today, and Kazakhstan continues to play a key role in global nuclear affairs, but in a very different way. Also, it was mentioned before, we are the world's largest producer of natural uranium, and for 2024, we supplied about 40% of world's uranium needs, and the share comparable to the OPEC's role in the global oil market. And I think this fact alone underlines the importance of stable and secure development of Kazakhstan. Our national company, Kazatomprom, is a regional leader, not only in terms of volume, but in applying advanced mining technologies. And our contribution goes beyond just mining. As you know, in eastern Kazakhstan, in the city of Uсть-Kamenogorsk, we host a low-enriched uranium bank, and this international facility helps reduce the risk of nuclear proliferations. But Kazakhstan is not just a supplier to others. We are now taking our next step by preparing to build our own nuclear power plant. This is a major strategic decision. Our electricity demand is growing rapidly. We are also committed to reducing emissions and diversifying our energy sources. And for that, nuclear energy is essential. And over the past 2 years, we've carried out detailed studies, and we consulted widely with our population. We've also engaged in dialogue with potential technology partners, including from France, China, South Korea, and Russia. And you also mentioned that Kazakhstan already has close ties with Russian and Chinese companies in nuclear industry. But I think partnership with the West, we are strongly interested in this direction because it strengthens Kazakhstan negotiation position. Also, it reduces the risk of political and technological dependence on single supplier. Also, I want to underline the importance of knowledge transfer and local staff development. And we know Western partners can bring us localization of equipment and services, also training of Kazakhstani specialists, and create research and training centers. And this ensures the sustainable development of our national nuclear industry for decades to come. So our goal is clear. By the early 2030, we want Kazakhstan's first nuclear power plant to be operational. And President Tokayev also placed strong emphasis on developing our domestic capacity. And we view civil nuclear energy not only as an energy solution, but as a strategic investment in our knowledge, in technology, in innovation, and global cooperation. So Kazakhstan's decision to go nuclear again, but this time for peaceful purposes, is not just good for us. It's good for global energy security. First, it makes global uranium supply chains more stable and diversified. I think in a time of geopolitical uncertainty, that matters more than ever. Second, it contributes to climate action. We all know that if the world is to meet the goals of Paris Agreement, we need more clean and reliable energy, and nuclear energy has to be part of the solution, it's obviously. That's why the Dubai Declaration called for tripling nuclear energy capacity by 2050, and Kazakhstan is fully aligned with that vision. And third, it reinforces the message that peaceful nuclear energy and non-proliferation go hand in hand. We've proven that Kazakhstan has proven that a country can give up nuclear weapons and still become respected leader in the nuclear field. So, to conclude, Kazakhstan passed from renouncing nuclear weapons to becoming a global hub for peaceful nuclear cooperation. This path is one of responsibility, trust, and vision. And as we said today, the world enters a new era of nuclear energy, and Kazakhstan stands ready to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarabekov. So to finish this last panel, last but not least, I would like to give the mic to Wesley Alexander Hill to give us a better understanding of the Chinese strategy in nuclear renaissance in Central Asia. So Wesley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, as it was introduced just now, I'm going to try to give everybody a good indication of not only what China's nuclear energy strategy is, but how this relates to Central Asia. Now, it's always very difficult to go after so many excellent speakers, but something I want to point out, and this was not intentional, though I did somewhat anticipate it, is that the element of Chinese influence has already come up a lot of times in a lot of different manners. It's sort of like a black hole. Its gravity is informing almost every other factor that we've discussed so far, even if it hasn't been directly observed. So I'm going to start this with a very American thing to do, and I'm going to tell a very quick story, but I promise you'll enjoy it. When I was in China, I wanted to go see a ghost city. I went to see Xiong'an, which is the new temple that Xi Jinping is building for state-owned enterprises. It is China's city of the future. He thinks that this will be the defining new testament towards what Chinese state-owned enterprises and nuclear policy will look like. I went in 2018, 1 year after it was announced. When you drive into Xiong'an, which is now this hub of new Chinese state-owned enterprises, companies, etc., the first thing you see if you're traveling from Beijing is a new nuclear power plant and the major energy company headquarters for Petrochem, Sinopec, and a couple of other major energy companies. This is because energy is a key national security policy for China. It's not just an economic consideration. It's not just an environmental one, though it is those two. China wants to cut emission increases year over year by 2030, and it wants to be carbon neutral by 2060. And unlike most other countries all over the world, even rich, developed Western ones, China appears to be on track to doing it. Already, the gasification and the nuclearization of previously coal-fired urban power plants and utilities has maybe contributed to the end of year-over-year CO2 emission increases in China. This is something that China takes very seriously. And for China, it's not just a prestige project, but it's also a means of assuming global leadership and changing the macroeconomic orientation of global trade and the tenor of discussions involving anything involving energy. That said, China is, as we're speaking, it's currently lagging a bit in the game of international nuclear geopolitics and geoeconomics. It's actually Russia that dominates a lot of the current civilian nuclear supply chain. And France and the United States have a lot of companies that have been able to leverage institutional memories and a lot of experience that currently still have a huge pull on the market. But it's still China that has the most latent potential. So what we're seeing is that China, even though it's behind in many areas, it is building up such a domestic capacity that we are going to see a slingshot effect of rapidly increasing global reach and relevance that we have not seen in decades. So in December 2024, China made a huge announcement that really underscores this. And when the China Nuclear Energy Association and the China State Council announced that China had reached 100% of domestic production of key nuclear technologies for civilian nuclear power. Now, China obviously has been a nuclear power for decades. It has had the theoretical capability to do all of this on its own, but it wasn't economic. And if you want a point of comparison, the United States is not 100%, does not have 100% domestic production of key nuclear technologies for civilian nuclear power. France does, but not the United States. So it's actually puts China in a league of its own. And then also broke its reliance on Russian enriched uranium, which again, China always had the capabilities to do, but this was an economic question. And as another point of comparison, it took 2 years after the war in Ukraine for the United States to finally stop importing Russian enriched uranium. So it took a very long time for the United States to retool, and roughly at roughly the same time, China also did it without the political imperatives that come from the war in Ukraine. So while a lot of these are still economically nascent, there aren't massive supply chains that are external to China yet. The scale of Chinese nuclear power that is coming online means that this is going to be something that is extremely important, and it is already important in terms of sourcing uranium and supply. Every year for the last 4 years, China has approved at minimum 10 new nuclear reactor projects each year. For comparison, the United States has constructed one, that is a single one, nuclear power plant since 1990. That reactor was 7 years late and $17 billion over budget. So
Wesley, we're losing you. We hope it's not censorship.
He's back, he said.
You're back.
Something's going away.
No.
Yeah, I hope I'm not being.
You're back. You're back.
Okay, good. I'll start that point again. Thank you for pointing that out. So, of America's 94 operational reactors, most of them are nearing the end of their life cycles. In comparison, the average Chinese reactor is more efficient, more durable, more powerful, and it's younger. They will be on the market for decades. And there is really no program anywhere in the world that is approaching this upscaling that we're seeing from China. So a huge reason for this is just the sheer amount of investment. We don't have exact statistics, but if anything from the State Council, Chinese State Council, or a couple of think tanks working on this, such as the National Bureau of Asian Research, are believed, China is spending at minimum hundreds of billions of dollars each year, something between 4 to 5 times the amount of the total Inflation Reduction Act just on nuclear power. So why am I emphasizing this so much? I'm telling you about the scale of the Chinese market, and the fact that there's a lot of things going on in China isn't particularly a big surprise. Well, it's to emphasize scale over new technology. And it is to emphasize that this scale is not necessarily translating to influence or immediate political changes in Central Asia that we're actually seeing elsewhere. So compared with the excitement and optimism that we see for small modular reactors in the West, and then we see a lot of Eastern European states very excited and signing contracts for future small modular reactors. And a few hours ago, the first U.S. public utility company in Washington State asked the nuclear energy regulatory body in the United States to utilize an SMR for public energy consumption. Compared to this, China does not have an SMR program, as advanced an SMR program. So while there are things like, Hualong, and they're talking a lot about installing new technology, it's not as advanced. So China is confronting us with not necessarily a bleeding edge of technology, but a scale of sheer investment and sheer demand. But this in Central Asia is not necessarily translating to extreme growths in Chinese influence. If I was giving this same lecture about, say, Namibia or other uranium-producing countries outside of Central Asia, the conclusion that I would be giving was that, well, this is going to increase a lot of Chinese influence. But this is not the case. What we are not seeing that a massive increase of Chinese influence proportional to its consumption of Central Asian uranium. As we mentioned in the report, there are 24 operators sourcing Kazakh uranium. The biggest reason for this and why this influence is not growing is that Central Asia is very conscious of not only the magnetism of the Chinese market, but Chinese geopolitics, Chinese geopolitical designs. So there are frequent local protests within Central Asia that have to do with, Chinese overinvestment, Chinese influence, etc. This in turn not only makes local governments and local actors very wary of overt dependence on China, but they also pursue counterbalances. They intentionally build up the middle corridor across the Caspian through the Caucasus to the west. They are seeking, especially in the case of Kazakhstan, they are seeking a consortium of several companies that will hopefully be involved in the construction of the Kazakh nuclear reactor, one of which will be Chinese. There will probably be Chinese and Russians involved, but they're also trying to get French entities and American entities involved. That is still forthcoming. That is still an on evolving situation, but it demonstrates that there is a conscious realization of the magnetism of the Chinese market, and Central Asian states are preemptively correcting for them. Unlike, say, lots of sub-Saharan African states, which didn't really have a long historical exposure with China, even though we're now approaching around 35 years of China's going out strategy and its acceleration of ties with sub-Saharan Africa. Central Asia has been engaged with various Chinese political entities for thousands of years. The Silk Road started as it wasn't just an overland economic route that just sprung up naturally. It started as a Chinese political project, and under the Han Dynasty, when it had a series of military outposts going west, trying to get to Persia, trying to get to trade with Rome, that generated tremendous local responses. So this sort of inoculation, if we can put it that way, against overt Chinese influence means that Central Asia is very well equipped to trade more with China, but not necessarily give in to China. And this really shouldn't be very surprising to people who look at the region and understand not just its ancient history, but its recent history. So since the independence of Kazakhstan and the rest of the Central Asian states from the Soviet Union, they have adopted, and especially Kazakhstan, this is sort of its most famous foreign policy strategy, a multi-vector foreign policy. So the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, very famously institutionalized this within sort of the fabric of the Kazakh state. And Kazakhstan has been more than happy to trade with Russia, trade with China, but it has very consciously sought out political support and human capital and training support with Western institutions. The Kazakh Bolshak program, which is an educational exchange institution that does extend to the nuclear realm. There are some nuclear engineers and professionals being trained under it in the United States, is the largest state-run program, or state-supported program, I should say, of educational exchanges and foreign exchange anywhere in the world, foreign exchange students anywhere in the world, seeking Western influence and counterbalancing to the magnetism of Russia and China, which are right next door. They're unavoidable, is something that the Central Asian states have been doing a long time. And it is something that they are pretty well equipped to continue to do. So if you take away anything from this, it's that China is going to be the defining geopolitical and geoeconomic actor for the renaissance of nuclear power that I'm pretty sure we are going to see all over the world. Not only is it getting involved in SMRs, but the sheer scale of its construction is just almost beyond belief. I am pretty confident that China is going to be reaching its medium-term goals. We'll see if they have they succeed in reaching their 2060 decarbonization goals. But China has a 40-year economic program. There is no 40-year economic program, to my knowledge, in France, definitely not in the United States, about Central Asia, or about nuclear energy, excuse me. So this power is unavoidable. China is going to be in the driving seat, unless Western policy changes, and I certainly hope it does, for a lot of nuclear energy-related things. However, I would say that for Central Asia, which is going to be the source of so much of this uranium, it is going to be vital for American and European nuclear endeavors going forward. it is actually very well positioned to resist and temper Chinese influence or attempts at Chinese influence. And this is just because it's not a new development. So I would encourage policymakers inside the United States, if you're thinking about uranium supply, if you're watching this at some point, to focus more on domestic expansion of the United States. Don't really worry, and you don't have to be worried about, Chinese dominance of at least Central Asian uranium sources. I would be more concerned about, say, Namibia or other emerging producers of uranium in sub-Saharan Africa or Niger, for example. So that's everything I have to say about China and about its influence on nuclear energy renaissance in Central Asia. I thank you all very much for inviting us and partnering with us, and we had a great time writing and reading the report. So for those of you in the audience watching, please read the report. It has a lot more detail and it will answer a lot of your questions, which I'm happy to start doing right now. So thank you again to everybody at UD.
Thank you very much, Wesley. So we have, unfortunately, not a lot of time, but still a few minutes to answer questions. So priority online because we have remaining question from the previous panel. One about the potential of US investment in SMR in Kazakhstan. Maybe you, Wesley, you spoke about SMR. Could you give us a few information about the potential of investment of United States in SMR in Central Asia?
Sure. So SMRs, to inform the audience, are small modular reactors. The rationale is that rather than having these massive construction programs and a lot of sunk costs up front, you get marginally less efficient but much smaller scale nuclear energy producing reactors. And these will ideally at some point be as easy as, having any reactor or any generator, that you tow behind a truck somewhere. So the rationale for investing in them in Central Asia is that there is a lot of localized uranium production, and there is a lot of energy-rich opportunities, energy-intensive industries, not just the mining of uranium, but say there is a large interest in data centers and AI in Central Asia. There is a huge interest in critical minerals mining. So the critical minerals competition that is adjacent to uranium that China and the United States are currently waging over things like lithium. That's also very energy intensive. So because there is this demand, but it's not the result of industrial concentration, it's not just big cities together, this makes it an economically perfect case for small modular reactors because you have cheap uranium supply and you have very intense but widely dispersed demand for energy, which means it would be very economically efficient. As for what the United States is doing there are a couple of American companies who are exploring this opportunity. I am not aware of any Chinese companies doing the same thing. Again, much of the Chinese expansion right now is domestic, inside and outside of SMRs, but there is tremendous potential there, and it's largely due to the geographic and macroeconomic characteristics we see, especially in Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Wesley. Mr. Sarabekov, you wanted to add something? We don't hear you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Wesley for this very interesting and accurate assessments. But I want to mention that we cannot yet affirm with certainty that Chinese or Russian company will build a nuclear power plant for us because negotiations are still going and our government position is clear and open and consists in the fact that Kazakhstan intends to create an international syndicate, if I can say that, international syndicate that will include companies from both the West, Russia, and China. So this question is still open.
Thank you very much. So I will dare to extend this Q&A 5 minutes. We're already over time, but we have many questions rising on the internet. Is there any question in the room? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for your speech. And as you said, Kazakhstan is more willing to trade with China rather than relying too much on China. And but China has more latent potential, and you said its reactors are new and more well-rounded. In this way, is there a possibility that China is willing to support Kazakhstan with its latent or newer technologies, together with the techniques and trainings and further supports and even some cheap commitments to persuade Kazakhstan to adapt to its new technology rather than the technology of Europe or the US? Thank you.
So I think that there is a very big barrier when it comes with China engaging in foreign capital, or especially human capital exchanges, and that's the Chinese language. I learned Mandarin. It is extremely difficult. It's probably the most intellectually difficult thing I've ever done. I could not imagine the difficulty of first becoming a qualified nuclear scientist and then having to engage, even through a professional translator, with Chinese on that. Now, that's obviously not impossible. It has been done, but there are so many very small impediments that make dealing with China in terms of human capital less desirable than dealing either with the West or with Russia. And that's why an overwhelming majority of human capital exchanges, not just in nuclear science, but throughout the sciences, economics, business, etc., tend to look at Russia and the West rather than China. As for the other part of the question, is China willing to help with technology transfers and things like presumably selling reactor parts? If past indication is any sign, which I certainly think it is, sure. But again, the advantage of what China is doing is not necessarily that it has a brand new cutting edge reactor that isn't seen in the West. There isn't any particular aspect of Chinese civilian nuclear technology that is unknown to the West. It's that it is being produced at such scale and at such speed that it is cheaper and more economic than its Western counterparts. So I am pretty certain not in the short term, because China is emphasizing its domestic energy reorganization, which it has said so in its 2025 energy law that it published at the beginning of the year. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more and more exports of Chinese civilian nuclear technology and energy technology in general, especially in the renewable sector. So I think it's definitely possible, but I don't think it's imminent. I think this is a medium-term, long-term dynamic that we should keep our eyes on, but it's not as relevant for existing projects or even projects that local governments may be thinking about doing.
Thank you, Wesley. You want? Sorry. Just a second. Yes, one question from Teva.
Thank you. Is it working? Yeah. Thank you, Wesley. Just a quick question. So we know that in the past there used to be tensions within the nuclear industry in China between CNNC and CGN, and it prevented some of the exports of the Chinese nuclear industry. Do you know what is the status of the tensions between the three large companies in the Chinese nuclear industry? And again, thank you.
So Chinese politics, especially domestic bureaucratic politics, is opaque by design. So I'll give this answer with the caveat that time may prove me wrong. But the general trend we've seen in recent years in regards to public utilities and state-owned enterprises in general in China is that state-owned enterprises are sort of being folded together under larger umbrella groups. So, and this is usually being done not through a new corporate entity, but a new political entity. So in 2023, I believe it was, the Chinese Communist Party created a new, also associated with the Xiong'an district, which I did not plan for this to be relevant. It created a new coordinating committee for nuclear energy exports. So my impression is that this coordinating committee has taken a lot of the decision-making power out of the state-owned enterprises for export control purposes. And this is sort of making it theoretically easier in the future for there to be more exports of these kind of things. The problem that we saw in the past was really a result of Chinese market reforms, because the managers of state-owned enterprises were emphasized for having excess goods or generating profit. They got big bonuses. But one of the ways they calculated generating profit was if they produced these things that were then not used. They were theoretically surplus. Even if there would theoretically be more profit made if you produced something, and then rather than having it sit in a warehouse, you actually exported it. So that was a problem for a while with the nuclear industry. It seems like the coordinating committee has cut back on that a bit, but this is also a fairly new institutional body. And because a lot of the focus of China's nuclear energy strategy, again, is domestic, it is very focused on the supporting other domestic energy initiatives. We're not going to see whether these tensions have been resolved one way or another decisively for probably 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Wesley. One ultimate question with a very, very quick answer. Given the fact that Kazakhstan nuclear power plant is to be built on the shores of water-stressed Lake Balkhash, what will be actually the environmental benefit of it, considering water withdrawal from the Ili River, which I believe is the river fueling the lake? Very quick answer, if anyone can answer.
Yes, I can answer. Of course, proposed construction of this power plant on the shores of Balkhash Lake, it presents a complex environmental dilemma. And as you know, Lake Balkhash is one of Asia's largest lakes, and on the one hand, this power plant aims to reduce Kazakhstan carbon footprint, but on the other hand, there is a risk of ecological degradation of Lake Balkhash, and to mitigate these risks, our government needs a comprehensive environmental assessments and water management agreements with China also. So it's a complex dilemma, of course.
To very briefly follow that up, I promise this will be a quick answer. We actually very recently did a whole report on this. You can read it on our website, iticnet.org, or you can see it at the Klingendale, Klingendal Institute's website from the Netherlands, because we collaborated with a Dutch institute about water issues in Central Asia, because who knows water better than the Dutch? So thank you. I'm obligated to self-promote for that.
You're all excused, Wesley. Thank you very much. That's the end of our seminar dedicated to nuclear renaissance and Central Asia. Thank you all the guest speakers. So Sébastien Pérouse, Zumabek Sarabekov from Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for being here online. Wesley Alexander Hill, Ariel Cohen, Teva Meyer, and Franco Michel Sandis. Thank you all for your very, very insightful, very interesting speeches. So you can find the report online on this topic, nuclear renaissance in Central Asia, and I hope to see you soon for a next seminar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.